So morning, everyone. I hope you all still have. Well, I'm not sure how many of you visited Health Week this week, but I hope, yeah, at least in some phases I've seen. I think the last 2 days, last 3 days to be fair. I hope you still have a little bit of energy, and also on this Friday morning. So for this morning, right, it's the idea to run through the AI Act and give you a little bit of background information on what you need to do to become compliant with the requirements that are set out in the AI Act. I would like to say I'd like interactive sessions. So if at any point you have a question, just raise your hand and we can stop and just let's have discussions. That always leads to better information than just me presenting all the time. But I have to admit there's quite a bit of information on the slides. So if at any point it gets really boring, just tell me and maybe I'll stop with all the technical details. A little bit of my own background. So I've been working at a company, one of the early companies actually that used AI in medicine. So we had a startup where we developed an AI solution to detect abnormalities on lung CT scans. I'm not sure how many of you have seen a lung CT scan. So you have this area of the chest, and it has roughly about 300 slides where a radiologist needs to run through, and they have on average 11 minutes to do so. And what we did is we detected the abnormalities, we classified them, we segmented them, all with the use of AI, and we tried to bring that to the United States. Unfortunately, we failed, which is a very long story. If you have questions on that, I'd be happy to comment. And we brought it obviously to the European market, and we were quite successful. We got purchased by a large American organization. That's when I decided to leave. And that's when I started my own company, MedQAIR. And I've been doing that now for 2 years. And I've been helping companies that make software medical devices and bring them to the market. And also work as a member of, I'm not sure if that's familiar with you, the JT21, which is the European Standardization Commission on Artificial Intelligence. And there's the SE42, which is the one that does that globally. And we have TC62, which might also be familiar to some of you, which is the Technical Committee on Medical Device Standardization in the electrical field. So that's a little bit of my background. So start a bit of a brief outline, right? We start with a little bit of background on what is AI, artificial intelligence, and how does it interlink with the medical device regulation. Then a big part of the risk management requirements that are set out in the Act. Quality management, then I aim to have a break in between. So I hope that we'll make it, and we have 10 minutes left to do the break because it's quite a lot of information, it's quite dense as well. And then after the break, go ahead.
Can we get the slide deck afterwards, or should we take notes?
It's a good question.
I'll send it to everybody.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's anyway shared, right? Yeah.
Also the recording.
Then the technical documentation and conformity assessment. So if, again, right, if you have questions in the meantime, please raise your hand and just let me know, and we can run through it. So I'm not sure if you are familiar, so this is a little bit of a technical slide. I'm going to try to explain what it means. So you have the AI Act on top. The AI Act is a horizontal law. So that means that it defines all the requirements for artificial intelligence systems and also for general purpose AI systems, which are put on the side. And then you have the medical device legislation, that's here. You have the machinery legislation, you have other legislation, and they're all regulated via Annex 1. So how it works is you have the AI Act that puts down a lot of requirements, and you have all these vertical legislation that put down requirements. That is just how it interacts with the MDR. But at the same time, right, and it's weird, is it also aims to fully regulate today's unregulated products. So it also puts down a lot of requirements that are vertical by themselves as well. So it's also a self-standing legislation. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you. So if you make an education system that uses AI, then this is your legislation, and most of the requirements are just in the AI Act itself, which creates a little bit of chaos in the field. It makes it complex. It also has a very weird interaction because of this with the MDR, which we'll have a look at. And then on the side, you have the general purpose AI systems. I'm not sure for the people who were there at the Health Tech Week, I explained this already, is that the general purpose AI was moved into the AI Act very last minute. So it wasn't there from the start, which also makes it that it's sort of a self-standing part within the AI Act. So going forward, you have high-risk AI systems. So the Act has actually several levels of classification of AI systems, and it defines high-risk AI systems. A high-risk AI system is high risk if, one, and it has two conditions. The AI system is a product covered by the MDR of the IVDR, because that's, if you see it, it's covered by Annex 1 or NX3. And let's continue. It also is required to undergo conformity assessment. And this is actually only for the Annex 1 products. So that means if you have a product, it needs to undergo conformity assessment via notified body, but also needs to is considered a product by itself covered by the MDR. It is considered a high-risk AI system. And the European Commission just worked on with the MDCG on releasing this documentation or the guidance on the MDCG. And there you can see how it interacts with the MDR. So you see that class 1 products, right? They don't involve a notified body. They're not considered high risk under the AI Act. If you look at class 2A, 2B, and class 3 products, all high risk systems under the AI Act. And there's one weird exemption. If you develop an AI system within a hospital, you can get a waiver for the MDR, right? You don't have to get CE marking. And now they actually made it very clear it also is not considered high risk under the AI Act. But they will bring additional guidance into the fields to explain what you need to do if you develop an AI system in-house. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Your class 1 measuring,
yeah.
It has to be all 3, like sterile measuring, reusable, surgical,
yeah.
fulfilled, or it's, if you just have an LLM-based sort of robot just capturing information
yeah.
on patient or for diagnostic purposes before making any decision, isn't actually under this sort of techniques?
I don't think so. Would you think it measures an LLM?
I mean, that actually registers data which will be fed in for the decision making with support systems.
If you look at the MDR, I think it defines measuring as in legal units, so millimeters, centimeters, meters, of volume. Yeah, exactly. So only if you have a class 1 product that performs any of those kind of measurements, then it is considered high risk under the AI Act. Or well, it's not a class 1. It's a class 1 measuring. Any other questions on the slide? Does this make sense to everyone? There's 2 complexities that I don't understand, so I'm happy that you understand. One is, it says that the AI system is a safety component or a product covered by the MDR. I don't know what that means. So I don't know what a safety component is till today, because that's new. And also, it itself is a product covered by the MDR. So if you have a CT scan, I will just give a very practical example. And the CT scan has an algorithm that just figures out retrospectively whether the CT scans are acquired in a good way. Doesn't do anything for the specific patient. Is then the CT scanner high risk? Can anyone answer?
Say no, because it doesn't affect patient. It's done in post.
Yeah, so then is it then not a product covered by the MDR? Yeah, I also don't know. I don't think it's clear. It's also not a safety component, right? Because it doesn't help safety in any way. It's just a retrospective analysis.
But is this product covered by the MDR, and this is if the device is used with diagnostic purposes, it's covered by MDR?
Yeah, so indeed, but so the device itself is a product, but the AI system doesn't contribute to the product, right?
It's connected to the product.
Yeah, but it doesn't analyze the outcome of the CT scan. It doesn't influence the outcome of the CT scan. I think there's a little bit of an area that needs to be clarified with further guidance. I hope that this MDCG guidance would explain. It does not. So it's an open area. So safety component is actually defined. So it's a component of a product of an AI system that fulfills a safety function, or the malfunction which endangers the health or the safety of persons or property. So it actually means, and this is actually a nice example, right? A cybersecurity aspect in a CT scanner that does intrusion detection, so you can detect a malicious attack on the AI system, or that's done by the AI system. It is a safety component, and the whole system, the whole CT scanner, with that intrusion detection system will be considered high risk, which is a bit counterintuitive, but that's what the meaning of safety component is. Going further, I think there's 2 important roles that are new. We have the provider. The provider is actually the organization that brings the AI system onto the market, so very comparable to the manufacturer. And we have the deployer, and the deployer is the party that actually installs the AI system and starts using it, a healthcare organization. And also here, I mentioned that 2 days ago, it's a bit of a weird thing in there, which is a natural legal person that uses the AI system under its authority, except where the AI system is used in the course of non-professional activity. So if you're a doctor and you start using an AI system, like you use ChatGPT, you throw your patient information in there, you do that on a structural basis, is then the doctor a deployer of an AI system? Any thoughts? Potentially, yes, right? They fit the definition. That means that they need to fulfill a lot of roles under the AI Act. I'm not sure if that's the intention of the AI Act, but again, further guidance could be helpful here. Going forward, and this is the chapter 2, which lists all the requirements of the high-risk AI systems. It's a lot. We'll touch on it in a little bit more detail. So risk management. It's very similar, and this is what I've tried to do, is explain where it's similar to medical devices, and then try to explain where it's different. So where it's similar, right, it applies to the full life cycle. It has the same prioritization, so you need to implement measures in the design, alerts, warnings, information for safety. It's all the same. But then there's also differences. And one of them is the assessment of fundamental rights risks. So if you have an AI system, and the AI system is used in the course of clinical care, you need to consider whether the AI system can potentially affect fundamental rights. Can anyone here name a fundamental right?
Privacy.
Sorry, privacy. And another one? In the EU? So the right to not be discriminated, for example, is one, right? And which is typical the one that is relevant to AI systems, because AI systems have a very good option to discriminate against people and groups. So that's
Quick wireless internet.
sorry.
Quick wireless internet.
Yeah. So that means that if you have those risks, right, a risk to privacy is definitely not a type of risk that people now commonly consider, although you need to take GDPR into consideration. But also the right of discrimination is not something that typically people look at when you develop a medical device. The way to do that is still a little bit questionable, so there's not really good guidance yet. There's a risk management standard under development. I'll touch on it in a second. And the other one, AI systems must be tested to identify the most appropriate risk management measures. Also not done by medical devices, so when you implement risk mitigation measures, you must actually test whether those are effective, but also if they are the most effective. So maybe you should test multiple options and see which is the best one to address the problem. And also the testing may include real-world conditions. I don't think this applies to medical devices, because you cannot test medical devices in a real-world setting except in a clinical evaluation. So you might test it in a clinical evaluation, but other than that, you cannot provide 5 options of AI systems into the field and see where the risk management system works best, right? I mean, people will not accept that for medical devices. Then some specific risks, right? If you look at the AI Act, it calls out very specific risks. And some of them, I think I mentioned, the fundamental rights risk, the risk to privacy, non-discrimination, but also risk to specific persons aged under 18. If you make a medical device today, that's not that different, to be fair. So it's quite comparable. And then risk to vulnerable groups. So that might be relatively new, right? So you need to check. Patients by themselves are considered vulnerable groups, but you might have subgroups of patients. And I think that also ties in with the bias risks. And there's risk to automation bias. Do people understand what that is, automation bias? So it means that once the AI systems give you feedback, and I think we discussed it over the few past days a few times, and you accept the feedback, and after 10 days you realize that the system is doing a very good job, and then you just start accepting the results of the AI system, and you over-rely on the outcome. Or it could even be the other way around, right? The AI system makes one fault one time, and you're just going to consider that the AI is wrong all the time. So that's automation bias. And then we have the racial or ethnic bias. That's specifically called out. And I think that makes, in medical devices, a lot of sense, right? One, a lot of the systems are trained on data that are interpreted by humans. Humans have inherent biases. So if we look at the training data, we might also introduce these kind of risks ourselves. We might introduce the bias ourselves by assessing the training data, but there's, I think, more particular examples, right? If you have an app to detect skin cancer, and you take an image of the skin, right? It does make a difference what the skin color of a person is. And there's a lot of these type of risks that might exist that people need to consider. And obviously also the patient age, gender, disabilities, data processing risks, and feedback loops. Feedback loops are specifically important for continuous learning systems. So if you have an AI system that continues to learn, I'll address your question in a second. Then if you feed it incorrect data, right, the system will continue to train on the data. So if the output of the system is incorrect, you feed that back as new data into the system. It continues to learn on wrong data, and the system gets worse instead of getting better. Go ahead.
Are there any suggestions that help
Yeah.
mitigate the risks for biases?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I will touch on it in a few slides. Yeah. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with this standard. Anyone? So there's a specific standard for medical devices. It's 34971. It's developed by BSI and AMI. There's a technical reason why it's a BS and AMI standard, which is that process is relatively short to develop a standard. So what they've done is they thought we need to have a risk management standard for artificial intelligence. We'll develop it within BSI and AMI. We can get that done really quickly. And then the next step, we'll put it forward as a standard for ISO. So, because that's a much longer process. So now the standard already exists, it can be applied, and now it's up for adoption as official guidance to ISO 14971, which is the risk management standard for medical devices. I highly recommend to purchase it if you're in this field, because it really clarifies where there are specific risks that you need to consider as a manufacturer. And this is what you'll see in most of my slides. This is the problematic part that we're facing today, is there's also a risk management standard being developed by JHC21. And I'm going to call them out on the slides. And it's not all standards. And this standard is going to apply to all AI systems, so not necessarily medical devices only. So what we'll see in the field is we'll have a medical device standard, the 14971. We'll have a specific AI risk management standard for medical devices, and we'll have a European non-medical AI risk management standard. And we'll see this for a lot of the topics, which is going to make it complex, because this one is European-based, but there's already also an ISO standard globally on risk management for AI systems. So we'll have 4 standards. So this is going to be a maze. So if you're in this field and you're trying to understand what standards do I need to follow, it will be complex. Go ahead.
Is there some kind of logic or ordering in which order they are, the 4 regulations are being applied?
Yeah.
Which prevails?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Yes and no. So I would say that notified bodies are going to look at this one, right, today. And I think they will do in the future because they're specific to medical devices. If you look at this one, and this is the complexity, this is developed by JHC21. They are the ones that they create harmonized standards under the AI Act. So the European Commission is going to accept this one to demonstrate compliance with the AI Act. So I think it's going to be a combination of the 14971 we're used to with medical devices, the 34971 for specific risks related to medical devices using AI, and this one is, for example, going to address fundamental right risks. So there will be a triangle all the time with a lot of standards. And I think this is one of the complexities, right? If you think back about the very first slide, about the horizontal nature, AI Act will have its own standards, and the MDR will have its own standards. And the AI Act is EU-based. It doesn't exist in the US. So we'll also have international standards that are specific to AI, but not to the European Union. So are you confused, or? I am. So I am working in JHC21, right, where they're developing these standards. I think this draft, they published the first draft. It has roughly 70 pages. We received 350 pages of comments and feedback. So this is not going to be easy and fast process. They're trying to fast track the risk management standard, but to date, I think that the expected timeline is somewhere end of 2026, beginning of 2027, whereas we all need to comply with the AI Act for medical devices by 2027. So it's August 2027. So the question is how this is going to work. It's a mess, to be fair. If you look at quality management systems, so I think a lot of this is again the same to medical devices, but there's also a lot of differences. So I'll just run through it. So this is on the strategy of regulatory compliance. For those who are working with the MDR, very familiar. It's almost the same. You can even combine the two. Except, and here's again a weird one for AI systems, is where they say that a substantial modification or the procedure for modifications must be called out in the strategy for regulatory compliance. And they say that for now, right, you don't need to report a lot of changes to an AI system which is class 2A or class 2B, but the AI Act introduces the substantial modification, which means that if you make a substantial modification, you must report it to the notified body. So it puts in additional requirements for reporting back. And then if you look at it, the changes might be predetermined. Does that ring a bell to anyone? Do you know what a predetermined change is? Has anyone looked at the FDA? You might know. No?
Just the something feature that you want to put in that's not currently there. So
Exactly. Yeah, so how it works today, right, is if you bring an AI system, well, a medical device to the market, you make a change, you need to go to the notified body, they'll assess the change, they'll approve it, and you go back. And what they now say here, and that's also what they have in the US already, is if you make a change to a system, you intend to make 10 changes to the system, you all document them in the technical documentation, send it into the notified body reviews, and then if they approve it pre-market, you can make their changes post-market. So you don't need to go back to the notified body, which is quite nice, to be fair. But if it's then unforeseen or planned, not planned, then again you need to go back to the notified body. Design and development, clearly a big topic. And this is where in the quality management system, you can rely for a big part on ISO 145, the quality management system standard for medical devices, the software development standard. But then again, you see that the mess just continues, where there's, one is they're developing a new 62304 standard, which will have an annex, which will have AI requirements. There's one on usability engineering that's under development, specific to AI systems. And then you see on the EU level, and I think, again, this is one of the most important standards for medical devices and AI systems, is there's going to be an additional quality management system standard. So we'll have the ISO 145, and we'll have this one. And for those who are aware, there's already an international standard, the ISO 42001, which might be accepted outside of the EU by some of the regulatory authorities. So again, 3 quality management system standards, and to me, it's a mess. And there will be additional standards. And so all my slides will just highlight a lot of standards. I'm sure that if you're not familiar with those numbers, have a look at the slide deck afterwards and you will find them all. Quality control procedures. The AI Act says you need to have quality control procedures. It doesn't define what that means. So it's really unclear. I'm not sure where it will be. This is one standard that we are currently developing. And this is one standard I'm actually actively writing with myself as well, which is 63521. Am I saying this right? No, this is not the right one. Sorry, I am referring to another one. But this is the machine learning enabled medical device, the performance evaluation process. So that will come on top of the clinical evaluation process that we already know for medical devices. There will be one specifically for performance evaluation. And then the AI system testing, and that's actually the one where I am helping with, is at 63450, which is the testing of AI, machine learning enabled medical device standard. So what that does is we, in that standard, this is where I can actually tell a little bit more about the content, is there's a lot of methods that we describe in there, the types of tests that you can do with an AI system, so verification testing. So you have A/B testing as an example, if that applies to medical devices, how you can employ that, but also other types of verification tests that you can execute with AI systems.
What's the timeline of the testing regulation? Is it final?
You mean this standard?
Yes.
Yeah, so currently we're in the final draft, so I expect it to be published somewhere within the next half year. So that should be quite fast. But there, it's based on another standard, which is the 29119, I think, which is an ISO standard, which is deemed not applicable to medical devices. So that was the base template, and then we adapted it for medical device use. But again, it's the amount of standards is actually crazy. So data governance, and I think what is super relevant here is because almost all the slides are just referring to standard. But here I can actually tell you a little bit more, which is that the data governance and data management, and I'll touch on it a little bit more. You should consider data acquisition. So when AI systems are built, right, you need to have data sets, which include training data sets, validation data set, test data sets. Where does the data come from? So where do you get it from? How do you purchase it? What party do you purchase it from? And you need to make sure that you do a proper purchasing process. But also, so that's something to address in purchasing procedures. The data analysis, labeling, storage, filtration, retention, all need to be governed by procedures in the quality management system. This is actually quite a long update of your quality system. And one to call out specifically is the 5259 series, which are an ISO standard series, which are for data quality for analytics and machine learning, and that one has very good insight in data management plans, testing of data sets, and other aspects. So if you want to test for the quality of a data set, that standard provides really good overviews and ideas on what to test for. So the completeness, the accuracy of the data, testing the timeliness of the data. So that's really useful. Just continuing, I think, post-market monitoring, sorry, I should have changed the title here, is today covered as well by 1345. The 1345 does not cover the AI ML specifics. Post-market monitoring plan, I'm not sure how many people here are working with post-market surveillance and post-market surveillance plans for medical devices? No one? So for AI systems, you must have a post-market monitoring plan. The AI Act is empty. It doesn't tell you what that means. And the reason is that they're developing additional implementing acts. So there will be additional regulations coming up under the AI Act that will explain what you need to do for post-market monitoring. And that is expected in February 2026. I hope to be able to say something about it here, but it's not there yet. And then on top of that, again, a standard is under development for post-market surveillance of machine learning-enabled medical devices. But then also there's another one, the trustworthiness framework with logging, transparency, and human oversight. So again, standards, and even more standards. Vigilance. So this aligns very much with the MDR and the IVDR. Do people understand what vigilance means here? Anyone? You'll have an idea, right? So if you have an issue with a medical device in the field, and a patient might potentially die because there's a problem in the product, then you need to report it to the regulatory authorities. And that is all covered today already by the IVDR and the MDR. So what that says in the AI Act is just look at the MDR and the IVDR and you're good. Except for one point, and which is the reporting of infringements of obligations under union law intended to protect fundamental rights. So if you have an AI system out in the field, you detect that it actually discriminates on certain groups or people, then that's an issue, and that will need to be reported to the regulatory authorities. And that needs to be reported to the Market Surveillance Authority for the AI Act. Do you know who that is in Estonia?
Yes, so I was about to ask who is the competent authority in case of Estonia.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's my question back to you guys. I have no answer to this. I really don't know. I think in the Netherlands right now the discussion is that this should be the Data Protection Authority. So it might be the same in Estonia. It might be a completely different new party. I don't know. It should be assigned.
We know.
Who are they?
We don't know the English version.
Technical surveillance.
Something, yeah.
So it is a different board.
Consumer protection and technical
Regulatory, sorry.
Kas ei olnud niimoodi, et
Okay.
bioametile läks üle see kohustus? Ainult meditsiini. Okay, in case of medical devices, it's drug administration.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
In case of AI, it's technical supervisor.
So, but if there's, for example, a safety incident with an AI system, you still go to the medical device authority, right? Except the only exception is for infringements of obligations under the law to protect fundamental rights. then you go to the other one, I guess. So regulatory authority communication, so the quality management system should also look into that. That means, and this is also super interesting, I'm not sure how many are aware, but providing or supporting the access to data for notified bodies, operators, customers, or other interested parties. So for those who read the AI Act, and I'll have another slide on it later on, if you make an AI system, so for the people who are not aware, right, for a medical device today, you go past a notified body. They'll need to look at the technical documentation. They might take samples of a medical device with them to test them. This will be no different for AI systems. So the notified body might actually request access to the data, which are the actual data sets. So they might just ask you, hey, provide me your training data set, your test data set, and the validation data set, so that we can retest on those data sets if what you claim as a manufacturer is actually correct. So that as another implication is they might even ask for the code of the software. So and this means as a manufacturer of such a system, that those data sets need to be available. And I think what I see for a lot of my clients in the field is they have their data sets and they have agreements in place with other parties that they have access to data sets, but they don't actually have the data set themselves. So when a notified body will come and ask, hey, can you give me the data because we want to test it? They don't actually have it themselves in-house, or they don't even have an agreement to make it available to an external party. That is a problem, right? So if you develop such a system, you need to think in your agreements on the data. You need to have the data available. You need to have the right versions of data available too. Because if you have one version in the field, but the notified body wants to actually check on a previous version of the system, you need to still have that previous version of the data set too, and the previous version of that data set. So this is going to increase the requirements for for having the availability of access to data.
Is there any possible risk to infringement of intellectual property rights?
Yes, but however, you need to demonstrate anyway your technical documentation to notify body. So that already exists.
The notified body, but it's the customers, or other interested parties.
Yeah, I don't think they will care too much as notified body who those parties are to you, right? But the mandatory part is that you need to make it available to regulatory authorities.
Each person who will actually been using this, or the client, can come to you and say, what?
Potentially. But if you look at the EHDS, right, a lot of the data sets should anyway be accessible to other parties.
This is still open now because there is still a lot of discussion on how it should implement the secondary use.
Yeah, it's a good question indeed.
No, actually, implementation acts.
But this, I think, for me, is a concerning point, because if you have a medical device today on the market, and in 2 years' time from now you need to comply with the AI Act, and you don't have the data set, but the notified body will request access to the data set, and you don't have it anymore, then your device will potentially go off the market, because you cannot provide the access that is needed.
And there's no grandfathering of any.
No. So that means as of August 2027, your devices need to comply, period, with the requirements of the AI Act.
Specify, is it to only devices that are deployed to the field that you would need to specify data set support? Like, for example, if you have prototypes running, you have to also provide data sets to show that we had something here working?
I think it only applies to the devices on the market. Is that answering your question? Yeah.
And there's no, like, cap on the history. It's from day naught of the market.
It's a good question. I think if your device is no longer on the market, they will not ask about historical versions. But if your device is still on the market, and it
has been for like 15 years, for example.
Yeah, you could have a problem if some of the versions that we're using, all the versions of the data sets for training, if those are still in the field, then you might expect that question. But I'm also not 100% sure. What I do know, and it's all optional, right? Notified bodies don't have to request the data, they may. What I've seen is that BSI, I know, but also I think TÜV Süd, they're developing their own internal AI test houses. So they can actually test these systems, and they will actually request data from manufacturers. But I think it has enormous implications that they can ask for it. Record keeping. Also not sure if people are aware of this part. So we'll touch on it in a little bit more detail later. But AI systems need to create logs, right, automatically. And those logs need to be stored in the technical documentation, well, not in technical documentation, sorry, at the end of the deployer or at the end of the provider. And they need to be stored for at least 6 months. Also here, there's one problematic aspect, I think, for the medical field, is that it specifies that a human providing human oversight over the AI system needs to be in those logs. So if you have an AI system that provides its output in a PAC system and a physician looks at the PAC system, documents patient record, how do you know which physician in the AI system log was responsible for reviewing the output? Because it needs to be stored automatically. I don't have an answer, by the way.
If the log system stops working, should the main system also stop working?
I think so. Well, no, not necessarily. That's not stated black and white, but you are required to have those automated logs. So it does mention, I think, for exceptions, I don't know if I know, for unexpected device behavior or unexpected AI behavior, that should also be logged. So if that is unexpected behavior of the AI system, then I guess the logs failing should be logged. But
in electronic identity, I know that there is such a requirement.
Yeah. But how do you do this, right? Because it's not always that straightforward. That
just configure a system. If log goes down, then main system shuts down.
Yeah, that I understand. Sorry. I thought you meant the identity of the person reviewing the output. Yeah. I'm not sure how that is going to be governed. And again, there's an AI system logging standard under development, which will be available. Resource management, I think, is also already covered for a large extent under the MDR, right? And under ISO 13485, that you manage your resources, you manage your suppliers. I'm not sure how many organizations today also address data suppliers. So where does your data set come from? What is the party who's delivering it? What are the requirements you set out for a data supplier? Do they comply with the GDPR, for example? Or where did they obtain the data from? Do you evaluate them as a supplier in a quality system? I see a lot of companies that are not doing that today. So they consider all the critical suppliers, but in a very traditional medical device sense. But then the data suppliers are just not on there, which are the most critical suppliers to an AI company. So those need to be added. But also, as I mentioned, the data acquisition, right? Where does your data come from? What is the data you actually need? If you need a training data set, what will you want for that data set to look like? What does needs to be in there? Why it needs to comply with the European regulations, but maybe you're getting the data from the US. Does it need to comply with HIPAA requirements? And that should all be part of the purchasing procedures of a quality system. And there's additional differences. So one of the items called out in the AI Act is the security of supply. And security of supply is also not defined further. How I interpret it is that you need to have continued access to computing resources. So for example, in some instances, if you use a Google Cloud environment from GCP and you use their GPUs, there might be times where there's just no GPUs available. If you provide a critical AI system in a healthcare environment, and all of a sudden the GPU systems are overloaded at Google and you don't have a reservation for resources, your system might just not work. So you need to embed in the quality system a way to ensure that the supply is governed. And it might also not be straightforward in all instances. And also, and I don't think this relates necessarily to that security. I just couldn't link it to another slide. But there's also a cybersecurity standard being drafted for AI systems with additional cybersecurity considerations. Going further, SMEs. So, and this is also a weird part in the AI Act to me, is that they note that small organizations, in order to ensure that the costs are not incremental or too high, micro enterprises, which are defined, I think, and also SMEs, are allowed to establish a quality management system in a simplified manner. Then again, they don't tell you what that means, so I'm not sure. And also, they don't tell you how it interacts with the medical device regulation. So if you need to have an ISO 13485 compliant quality management system, then how do you build an on top simplified MedQAIR quality system? I just don't know. So I don't know what that means. I can't explain. I hope that there will be guidance, and I hope it will apply to some extent to the medical devices, but I doubt it somehow. This is probably a terrible slide, but it's good to call out. So just overall in standards, right? You've seen a lot of them drop by. And is anyone familiar with Snake? Does it ring a bell to anyone? So TC62 has a working group, which is Snake. And what Snake does, and this is really, if you make a medical device using AI, Snake is your best friend. Because what they do in Snake is they assess all the standards that have been developed and are currently under development, and they provide an assessment of whether that standard fits to AI systems and how they should be implemented. And this is just a list of all the standards they've assessed today, and it's continuously being updated. And if you need standards and you need to understand which standards apply to your organization, Snake is the place to go to. These reports are really hard to find in the website of TC62. So that's, sorry for that. But if you want it, I think the slides will be shared. I hope the link will work when they're shared, because this is just a hyperlink directly to the reports of Snake. But as you can see, it's already becoming complex. And yeah, they've done quite a lot of work. And the other one to monitor is the working program of JHC21. So also, I'm not sure if people know what a standardization request is. So the European Commission, right, they developed the AI Act. In the AI Act itself, there's a clause which says that if you comply with harmonized standards, it's a presumption of compliance with the AI Act. So that's why JHC21 has received the request, the M593, you can find it online, to develop standards that support the AI Act. And some of these standards are, so these are all these standards. So there's logging requirements in the AI Act. This is why this standard is being developed by JHC21 and all the other ones. So this one, also considering logging, but also transparency, human oversight, will provide insight in how to comply with the requirements of the AI Act. So the JHC21 program is also critical to monitor to understand what is coming our way. And on a global level, then obviously JHC1, SC42, but those standards are often terrible, to be fair. And that's, I'm not, also maybe also an interesting note, is that SC42 is heavily dominated by big tech organizations. And big tech organizations just have, but also a lot of university groups, for example, all with very conflicting requirements and all not having the interest of medical device companies at heart. Obviously not. So that just creates standards that are high level, non-specific, with limited requirements. Whereas JHC21 is really aiming to put down standards that have requirements, that explain what you need to do. So I think those standards are generally going to be of better quality. Then we have a break, I guess, for 10 minutes. So let's continue with technical documentation, which is the other part, right? So the quality system is one of the big parts and one of the big chunks. The other big chunk is getting the quality, well, the technical documentation updated for medical devices and actually providing, demonstrating that you comply on a technical level with the AI Act. Technical documentation is already required for medical devices. Both can be combined. That's good news. Standards, again, they're heavily delayed, but compliance with the AI Act is already mandatory by August 2027. Which is, again, problematic because most of these standards are going to be late. So some might not arrive before the beginning of 2027. And I think that's still an optimistic timeline. I saw a presentation recently from TC62, where they mentioned that typically the development of standard takes around 7 years from start. And they started writing these standards 2 years ago. So good luck to all those involved. One other aspect that's also interesting is, as far as I'm aware, I might be wrong, there are no notified bodies yet, 0, that actually can audit against the AI Act, which is also problematic since we only have 2 years left, and all the existing companies still need to go through those new notified bodies, or at least their existing notified bodies, which need to be notified. So if we don't have those notified bodies in time, we'll see a similar problem that we had with MDR, IVDR, with very delayed timelines. And there is an AI questionnaire that was issued by notified bodies, by an MBMed. If anyone in this field, also take a look at that document because it provides a good overview of what notified bodies expect in technical documentation. Again, I think I need to rush a little bit because of the time, otherwise we're not going to get through it. I'll mainly focus on the differences. So you have a general description of the device that already is laid out quite well for medical devices today. One tip I would give is try to explain very clearly how versioning works, because versioning of a software system makes sense, but then there's one level lower beyond the product itself, which are the AI models that need to be versioned, but also the code needs to be versioned, but also the model itself needs to be versioned, right? So that you know exactly which version of the dataset fed in which version of algorithm fed into the higher level of the medical device. And you can have that traceable in 2 ways, which is not always easy. And other items to be described in the general description are also interaction with other AI systems, descriptions of the hardware on which the AI is intended to be run, and also a description of the user interface. So that's something that's not really requested for medical devices today, although many manufacturers will do that, but for AI systems, it's just a mandatory requirement. And then this is the part where I think is the main jet of it, is the detailed AI system description. That doesn't exist in the MDR today, and that has very distinct requirements. It doesn't need to be one document, right? The AI detailed descriptions can be a set of documents. They can be in throughout all kind of different locations in the technical documentation. And it's fully different from what we have. So it needs to explain, if you're using a pre-trained system, where the pre-trained system comes from, how you selected the pre-trained system. I'm not sure if people are aware, but it's really nice. Page is one of the organizations. They're a large medical device manufacturer, and they assess pathology slices. They built an enormous foundational model that was trained on millions of pathology slices. And anyone can use that foundational model to build a model themselves on top of it. But then you might just really need to tune it. You will not have access to the full data set, potentially, that is used by Page. So you need to explain really well what their pre-trained system was and how you thought that that was a system that you could use.
Does that not go against one of the previous?
Yes. Yeah. But you might have an agreement in place with Page. I'm not sure how they will resolve that, where they will grant access if needed. But it could also be that notified body is only going to be interested in the portion that is your additional data to tune the pre-trained system. Exactly. Yeah. Then the general logic of the AI system and the algorithms, including design and classification choices. That sounds very, very generic, but it can go into really deep levels. And I'm not sure how many are familiar, but when you develop an AI algorithm, there's a lot of inherent choices that you do in parameter tuning, and you make choices in how the AI system eventually works. But those choices need to be documented somewhere. So you need to be able to explain to a notified body why you made certain choices. And those choices need to be backed up, right, by a rationale. And I think in my own experience, we didn't do that properly at the company I worked for. It led twice to us having to do a recall with the system in the field because some choices were inherently made by the AI data scientists, and it turned out that they had clinical implications, and some of those implications were that we systematically overestimated the volume of pulmonary nodules, which can lead to incorrect outcomes, for example. But I didn't know, and we didn't document that properly, and I think there's a lot of logic and good reasoning behind it to do this at a very detailed level. So if you're in this field, talk to the AI data scientists, ask them what are the choices they made, and ask them to explain it. And also the AI system architecture that just needs to be very clear. So you need to have a very clear overview of all the processing steps, including all the data pre-processing and the processing itself. So for example, not everything in the AI model is the AI algorithm itself, right? You have data preparation steps that go before it. And those steps also need to be explained so that you can do a proper risk assessment on all those steps. And then the computational resources that were used and documented as well. And also this sounds odd, also from my own experience, and this is a very practical example. We trained our system on GPU systems. Every now and then, new GPU systems come out, right? And we started using different GPU cards. Apparently, there was an error within TensorFlow, which is one of the typical tools that is used in the field of artificial intelligence. And it was not compatible with a very specific GPU. There was an error, there was a bug, and that led to a significant performance drop in our system. And we didn't systematically test the algorithm on all the different types of GPU that we used in the field. So be aware that GPU systems and GPU cards can cause issues, especially with specific software types. So there's risks, and the notified body will want to see that what you support is actually the one you've tested, right? So that you have clear evidence why this is a good combination. This is a lot of text, sorry for that. Probably too much. But let's see, it's specifically on dataset management. And this, I think, is also one of the larger portions. I'll just summarize it very briefly. What it says is that you need to manage your data, right? So your training, your test sets, etc. And how do you do this effectively as a manufacturer? And that's not, this today doesn't exist also in the MDR. And I think the main items is you need to think about your data lifecycle management. And the best way to do that is to have a clear plan on how to manage your data. Have a data management plan inside the technical documentation that explains where you get the data, what procedures you used, how that data is being treated, how you prepare the data, how you make your choices, how you include, exclude data. And you see it here. So the data management plan and also data management specifications, including the statistical characteristics for every data set, right? You have a data set. You want to know exactly what are the characteristics of the data. What was the range of ages of the patients that are included? What was the youngest patient? What was the oldest patient? What is the mean? What is the average? And you want to know that perhaps for the patient's age, gender distribution, all the other characteristics associated with the patients, just to make sure that someone else who is the notified body, when they review it, and they can check whether your claims that you're making for the device are actually included in those data sets. So that if you say that your device can be used for all ages, that you actually have data to demonstrate that. And not that in the data set you only had one person who was 20 years old and the rest is 60 plus. Then how can you make that claim, right? And that needs to be really clear. And also, one thing to do is to document the requirements around data, the risks around data verification and validation, how you tested the data. It's all relevant to report. And data risks are just indeed, I think we spoke about it earlier in the session. How did you address bias, right? What are the types of risks that you can expect in the data? Is there skewness in the data? Is it overrepresented for specific groups? And it's really hard to make this specific here in this session, but it's really different from one AI system to another. It's never the same. If you use an AI system that's based, like we did at Aidens, we had CT scans, right? In CT scans, the acquisition system, for example, the CT scanner, the manufacturer of the CT scanner is relevant. And for pulmonary nodules, there's other requirements than when you're having an AI system that's used to, let's say, detect an abnormality in endoscopy videos. It's just, it really intended use specific. And one thing, I'm not sure if people have ever worked with AI systems and fed them to the FDA. FDA has been asking for this for years, but you need to demonstrate the actual performance of the AI system, all those subgroups as well. So giving one output, let's say you have a segmentation algorithm and you segment an organ, right? Then the FDA will want to know how good your system is overall in segmenting, So you might provide a DIE score, but then they also want to know how good are you in segmenting organs of people with, for example, a very high BMI or a very low BMI, or how good is the system in people from different ethnic backgrounds, if there might be differences there. And they will want you to test it on all those different subgroups. So that should be part of the data as well. Generalizability is really a big aspect. And it's often overlooked. But today, and I know in the FDA you will not get through, if you don't do this properly, notified bodies are not super much on top of this yet, but the AI Act will definitely enforce it. And then clinical performance evaluation, clearly the test data needs to be explained in the clinical evaluation plan and in the evaluation report. I think most of that is already mentioned and called out here as well. Does this make sense to everyone? It's a lot of information. Is there something that requires more clarification? Go ahead.
Yeah. You seem to have a good practical experience, and thank you for sharing your mistakes as well. That was very valuable. I was wondering, as a practitioner, how do you keep track of this documentation? Do you use like old-fashioned Word documents, Google Docs, or some wiki system, or files in Markdown, or what's your system? How do you?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's a lot of systems out there that are specifically designed for software development, software medical device development. And what they do is they allow you to document the requirements, link requirements to tests, and link the tests, the requirements also to risks, so that you can clearly see the whole cycle from a requirement to a risk to a test case, and from a mitigation as well back to the test cases. And those systems will also demand, for example, that you define requirements. Just make a separate category on data requirements, have a separate category on data risks, etc. And then on the front end of those systems, you can pull all those risks to create a report. And some of these systems, there's matrix requirements, there's Catrix. You can do that as well to some extent in Jira and Confluence. And there's a lot of other systems. I would definitely advise not to do this in Google Docs or in Excel sheets or in Word documents, because it's a pain.
So you prefer wiki, or do you have a specific program or that you can recommend? Or?
I use matrix requirements a lot, but these systems are typically quite expensive as well. So having these kind of systems can easily run into 20 to 40,000 euros a year based on the number of users. And for large organizations, it goes even higher. So it's, yeah, some of the smaller organizations will always need to make an assessment of whether they have the resources available to use such a system. I would always recommend it, because otherwise at some point in the future you'll need to do that transition anyway, because it becomes unmanageable.
So this is the matrix one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Go ahead.
And the notified bodies, do they already use like electronic systems?
On their end to do the review. So there's one notified body.
That you have to send in the your data like PDF, but somehow.
So there's one notified body in the Netherlands. They're called Scarlet, where they started in the UK, but due to Brexit, they had to open an office in the Netherlands. And they built a whole GitHub system where you can fill out all your conformers in GitHub and submit the whole repo to the notified body, and they will review the repo. They found out that it didn't work, so they also transitioned back to a more traditional system where manufacturers can provide either PDFs or access to an external system. So not really. I know that BSI and I think TÜV are now experimenting as well with AI systems assessing the technical documentation from notified bodies. For the manufacturers. And also FDA just launched a program, I think a few months ago, to do which is problematic, right? So I recently heard a company that had 40,000 pages of technical documentation that they submitted for the device. But if there's not a single FDA reviewer that can read 40,000 pages, AI can do that. So yeah, it's interesting to see what will happen. Yeah, it's a lot, right? Then human oversight is clearly also not in the, well, it's slightly explained in the NDR today, right? That people need to review and you need to explain to how they need to use the system. The AI Act just goes one step further. They require you to document as part of your risk assessment what are the human oversight measures that you require from the deployer, right, to the hospital. Who needs to review the results? How do they need to do that? How do they need to document it? And one thing I'll say here is that when people say human oversight, you would expect that for every system, every result needs to be reviewed by a human. That is not true, right? So human oversight in this sense means that it could also be done through trend analysis, right? You could see, are the outcomes changing over time? And then is there a point where a human needs to start reviewing results again, or where you need to start jumping into the results? So it could mean that you have a fully continuous learning automated system that has no human in the loop anymore, whereas the human is more monitoring the system overall, but not reviewing the individual patient results. Does that make sense? I don't think there's such devices out in the field yet, but there is freedom to do that under the AI Act. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, so the human oversight measures need to be explained in the IFU. Not so interesting, I would say. And one point, and I think it's also good, is that the AI systems must include a stop button in the event of AI becoming rogue, right? This is my translation of the requirement. But for the AI system to come to a safe halt. So that means that at any moment in time, if you see that an AI system is malfunctioning, is doing weird things, you can stop it at any given moment. But if you have a surgical robot, right, where there's a surgical arm going into a patient driven by AI, you might imagine that if you press a stop button, it could also introduce a lot of harm to the patient. So that's why they explained that in the event that that would be available, it needs to come to a safe halt. So there needs to be a procedure in place in such a device to make sure that it can stop safely. Predetermined changes, already discussed earlier. Substantial changes need to be cleared through a new conformity assessment. That's why you can include them prior to the submission with clear safety boundaries. So you say, I'm going to change this to the system. A new system is going to perform within this range and not beyond. If it goes beyond, we will not release it to the market. If it is within that range, we will release it. Notified body can agree to it, and you can release a new system to the market without going past to the notified body. System testing, again, there's also that standard that I just mentioned. You must assess accuracy, robustness, and compliance with the requirements. So that is just, accuracy I'm very familiar with. Robustness, still to be determined through standards, what that exactly means. How do you define robustness, right? But I guess part of that is also the generalizability. How well does it generalize to a lot of the subgroups? How well does the algorithm work on a very specific subgroup on, let's say, women between a certain age range, used on a specific system? Does it then still function, for example? And also the testing of discriminatory impacts, exactly the same point as above. So patient age, gender, disease, health status, etc. Cybersecurity. Also, manufacturers will have a lot of new cybersecurity risks to consider. Adversarial attacks, data poisoning, membership inference and model evasion. In all honesty, I don't know exactly what those risks mean. They're called out in the AI Act. The one that's quite clear is data poisoning, right? If you have a continuous learning AI system, you're going to feed very horrible data into it. The AI system is going to get worse. Other patients will suffer if someone with a malicious intent does that. You need to consider potential measures to avoid that. And I'm not sure, so threat modeling today is already required for medical devices. So introducing AI-specific risks and threats is just easy add-on, I would say. Post-market monitoring, we already discussed it as well. So for medical devices, right, the most important aspect to monitor today is the performance. Performance doesn't state accuracy. For AI systems, they say very specifically you need to monitor the accuracy of the AI system and also the implications on specific groups. So again, the generalizability comes back in post-market monitoring. Make sure that the accuracy of the device is good, but also the accuracy is good on the subgroups. And that plan that I mentioned earlier will be available in February 2026. Declaration of conformity, also quite interesting. So today, you need to draft a declaration of conformity for a medical device to state you comply with the regulatory requirements. You need to do exactly the same for the AI Act. And you need to claim conformity with the GDPR, which is weird. And because today you don't need to declare anywhere that you comply with the GDPR, right? I mean, it's a law, it applies anyway. So the fact that you need to make that explicit declaration and state my AI system complies with the GDPR might pull the notified body to also consider, hey, you're stating that you're compliant with the GDPR, provide me the evidence. So this actually extends the option for a notified body to go beyond the AI Act and the MDR in their responsibilities and also start looking into the GDPR aspects. So as an organization, that's one to consider. And I find it a weird one, to be fair. I'm not sure why. And it, go ahead. Maybe you had a question. No. Conformity assessment, these are my last few slides. So I think we're almost done. And I think it's too much information anyway for such a short time. So I think it's a good moment to come to an end. Conformity assessment today, right? You follow an MDR or IVDR conformity assessment route. That means you go to the notified body, they will follow a specific, they look at your technical documentation, quality management system, and then grant you the certificate. Under the AI Act, it points you back to the MDR and the IVDR. So if you have a medical device, they will just tell you, they'll follow the exact same procedure as currently is applicable today, which is really nice because it makes it simple. Yet there is another items that need to be considered, and we talked about it earlier. They can request access to the training, validation, and test data sets. They can also request access to the system code, and they need to review the predetermined changes. And as I mentioned earlier, for those who have data sets that don't have those in-house but use them from clinical institutions, make sure there are agreements with those institutions. And make sure that the institution will grant access to the notified body when the notified body comes asking for it. And also the previous versions, as I already mentioned, because you want to make sure that they can request it for an earlier version if needed. And that is not the data set that was just upgraded and the previous version has been deleted and you cannot reconstruct it previously. You might have an issue. And then one more item, I think, for conformity assessments. Well, the notified body still needs to be notified. So if you have a notified body today, I'm not sure what the exact number of notified bodies are today. Maybe there's around 40, 50. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody else knows. There's 0 notified for the AI Act. And if a manufacturer today is with a notified body, and the notified body decides not to get notified under the AI Act, but you do have an AI system, you will need to switch notified bodies, because otherwise you will need to go from the market in August 2027, which is interesting. And I'm not sure if all notified bodies will be notified. And I'm not sure if they have the intention to all be notified. Today, and this is very technical, I think for you it might be slightly too technical, but I'll try to explain. For class 2A and 2B devices, you can apply sampling. So the certificate will give you a category on the certificate, and that will say anything that's within that category you can just put on the market without going past the notified body. And the clarification was in the latest MDCG, not this one, another MDCG that says that this MDCG will continue to apply, which is good because that means you don't need to get certification for every single AI system if they all fall within the same device range. Doesn't make sense. Does it? A little bit? Okay. If you, go ahead.
Wasn't the AI systems are from different vendors? Like how do you classify it when you say the group?
Well, if it's in different vendors, you mean from a supplier of an AI system?
Yes.
Are they already on the market? Or you're changing them and bringing them onto the market?
The latter, they're bringing.
So if you're changing the, I guess the device range, how you should see this. Let's say you have a medical device to detect pulmonary nodules on a CT scan, right? That we had. But now you're detecting pulmonary nodules, but you're also going to detect, how you call it, tuberculosis on the same CT scan. That is a different indication, but it's all within the lungs, it's all on CT scan, and it's all within the same device range. Then you don't need to go to notify body. If you say, now I'm also going to do MRI and I'm going to look for prostate cancer, it's a different indication, different location, then you probably need to go back to notify body.
Similar value proposition is good.
Exactly. So if it fits within the same category, and the category notification for class 2B, 2A is more broad, and for 2B it becomes more narrow. So with 2A devices, I think you have a lot more room to make changes, introduce new devices without going to notify body. For class 2B products, that's a little bit narrower. Any other questions on that part? No. The final note, right? So we're at the end. What I would recommend any company is to put in place an action plan. So what am I going to do? And first start, and I know people are not going to like that, but assess the relevant standards, which I just gave you a lot of long lists of standards to read on. But understand what applies and what requirements are there and will be coming towards you. And assess the existing products, if you have already products, and take a look at whether those products are compliant with the AI Act by default. Do the products already create automated logs that you need to be compliant? Are the data sets sufficiently representative? Do you have access to all those data sets? But also, is there a stop function on the system that is demanded? If these things are not there, the AI system will not be compliant and it will need to be off the market by August 2027. So those are the things to assess first. And then also updating the quality system, look at and I would prioritize on design and development procedures, because your design and development procedures ensure that what comes out of your quality management system complies with the AI Act, so that your new products will comply automatically with the AI Act. And do an assessment on existing products, on their technical documentation to see what needs to be updated. And then ultimately all the people in the organization will need to be trained to make sure that what they develop will comply with the AI Act. Again, the timelines are short, right? So compliance will be mandatory already August 2027. So that deadline is racing towards us. And I have severe doubts that this is going to be realistic, but we'll find that out. I'm not sure if you are aware of all the problems with the MDR, IVDR, but the transition from the previous MDD to the MDR, they said that was going to take 3 years, and that was in 2017. We're now in 2025. There's still products on the market under the MDD, and they're not transitioned yet. So I think then if we look at a 2 years timeline to do this, I doubt that this is feasible. Although the group of products are much smaller because it's only AI-enabled medical devices, I still think it's impossible. So short feedback survey, if you want to fill it out. I think it's per the request of the organizers, so feel free to scan the QR code, provide feedback, let us know what you think. If there's any other questions or topics for discussion, then let's take the moment now, I would say. Was it a bit of an information overload? I think so, right?
Especially for Friday morning.
Yeah, sorry for that.
But that's my fault.
I think having access to the slides will be fine. You have an overview and look at the slides later.
Yeah. To be fair, I'm looking forward to the day where we have those standards, because it will clarify a lot of what it is we need to do. But also it will make it more complex. So for any organization developing medical devices using AI, I would highly recommend having dedicated people to perform these tasks and assess those standards.
Like GDPR also, but the AI equivalent, AI Act equivalent.
I think so, yeah. But even GDPR, right, doesn't have that enormous load of standards underneath.
I don't know. Again.
So, go ahead.
Suppose you as a professional track which acts have been passed and which regulations have been passed and which standards have been adopted. How do you track them?
How do I do that? Yes. So I'm a member of the JHC21 and SC42. I can show you my inbox. I get Yes, but I receive about 10 to 20 emails every day on updates on all the standards, and I read absolutely zero. So I don't know. How do you do this? I'm still lost. I don't know. It's impossible, to be fair. And I think it.
I was asking if there's a portal that perhaps you subscribe to. Newsletter.
I don't know. I think you probably can subscribe to updates from JC21 and SC42. The better is to just actually become a member. But it's you need dedicated time, and this is where I was amazed, right? So an organization like Microsoft has 7 people full-time on the European standards only. And whereas people from medical device industry probably have to do this next to their job and might get 1 hour in a month to do this. It's unfair, but yeah, it's almost impossible. Even an organization like Philips, I think they have two staff members who did this as part of their daily jobs, not full-time. And those are large organizations. I think Siemens has 1 representative also doing it next to their daily job. And then it's just complex. Any other questions? No? Then I assume everything is very clear. Yeah. Thanks.